Ultimate Fighter with him, this is good attention for him. I don't want to give him this. I never give him this. Even if they gave me $5 billion, even if they gave me UFC ownership, I'll never do this. This is good attention for him. It's done. Everything is done. On October 6th, I finished him, and I finished everything about him. And with that, welcome to Early Stoppage, a show where the news of the day is usually given sometimes. Oh, no. All right. And with that, welcome to Early Stoppage, a show where the news of the day is usually given just enough time, but sometimes not enough. If this is your first time stopping by, we thank you. And get ready for something you won't find anywhere else. I'm John Franklin. I'm joined, as always, by the godfather of Fight Night Picks, Craig Allen. Craig, how are you?
John, I'm well. It's a busy week in MMA. Fight Night Picks is now on TikTok at Fight Night Picks. So for all you TikTokers and you sock hoppers, make sure you hang on out with Fight Night Picks on TikTok. I'm sure there's going to be some weird, fun stuff there. Not a lot of MMA on the TikTok, John.
That's true. All right, Craig, in this episode, we talk bribes, MMA cabinets, and Wakanda style. But we begin with Aljamain Sterling. Craig, it looks like a deal is done to have the UFC, in the words of the great Steve Mazzagatti, hook 'em up between Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling on December 12th in Las Vegas. So this proves a few things. One, that Dana listens to the show, and two, that Sterling is either getting the push from the promotion or the mandate from the fans. But here's the question, Craig. Does either fighter come out of this fight a star?
No, they don't, because this is like B-roll. And it's unfortunate because for MMA hardcores, this is the fight to make. This is the A-plus type of fight because you've got the guy who's run through just about every contender there is in Aljamain Sterling. You've got Petr Yan that's won himself over with big career type of wins over Uriah Faber and Jose Aldo. But those fights don't equal this fight, if you understand where I'm coming from. I mean, this isn't one of those star-making type of fights unless you end up with a wild finish. I mean, look at what Corey Sandhagen did over the weekend against Marlon Moraes. That was a star-making win, was it not? It was probably the 5th or 6th best knockout of the weekend. I'm sure we'll get to that. But that was such an impressive knockout by Corey Sandhagen, and we're not talking about him today. So does either guy come out of a star to this fight unless they put on an absolutely incredible performance? But I just don't see it. I mean, Petr Yan, they want to try and build around him. But again, we've talked about it and compared him to Lyoto Machida. Is this guy like face of the franchise at bantamweight, or is he like Taylor Hall signing with the Buffalo Sabres? He gets his 1 year, $8 million contract, but you know he's out of there next year. Is Petr Yan the type of guy that won the belt against Jose Aldo when it was vacant and then just has no title defenses? I mean, what's the scoop here? So I don't really know. I think Aljamain Sterling has a great opportunity in front of him to get a win over Petr Yan. But at the same time, does anybody come out a star unless it's a wild performance? I just don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, if either one of these guys was a star, it wouldn't have taken this long to make the fight. Because, obviously Petr Yan needed a dance partner that was more famous than him, which is why he's been flirting with all these other fights. And Aljamain Sterling's been on the back burner. And if Aljamain Sterling was the star, he would have been given the fight. So here's the interesting thing about these guys. They're both talented guys, so let's set that aside. I think Petr Yan's a little bit better on social media than Aljamain Sterling is, and Aljamain Sterling's a little bit better in the room than Petr Yan is. So combined, they're a hell of a star. They both got things that make them that we've seen fighters that end up being stars have. They each have those qualities. They just don't have both of the qualities. So, yeah, it's going to take a huge performance, but we've seen huge performances before not make stars. So this one is interesting for me.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people out there that are going to take my answer. They're going to say, oh, geez, you're casual. You don't know what you're talking about. But, look at it. Did Petr Yan fight some of the toughest competition in the division? He did, but Uriah Faber, that was a big layup. Jose Aldo at 135, coming off 2 losses. Yeah, you probably could have predicted that one. It wouldn't take, Matt Allen to predict that one. So really, putting this fight together, it's the fight that the fans deserve but can you make somebody out to be a star? I just don't see it. It's a good fight. I just don't see it. But John, I mean,
hold on. Before we move forward, I got one thing for you. Well, I wanted to mention this a second ago. I was watching or listening to rather the rewatchable that Bill Simmons does on his network of Cocktail. Cocktail, I'm a guy of a certain age that would be into old Tom Cruise movies. So in Cocktail, they had this thing called Coughlin's Law. And Coughlin's Law was the older bartender, and he had all these different rules. So here's a Franklin's Law for you. And we can start compiling this if you want. If they want to go into an unwritten rule book somewhere, that's fine too. Franklin's Law. Casuals make stars, not hardcores. So I think that when all these people are saying, Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling is a hardcore dream, you said it yourself, and the people that are accusing you of being a casual, those are the people, listen, the UFC, the NBA, MLB, NFL, they'll tell you the same thing about hardcores. We don't cater to you because we'll have you either way. You're not going anywhere. That's what makes you a hardcore. So if you're a hardcore and you're waiting on the UFC to start booking fights based on what you want, it's never going to happen, my friend. So I think that you need to understand where Craig's coming from when he says, you can brandish him or brand him a casual all you want. That's how stars are made.
All right, so let's talk about stars. And I mean, at Fight Night Picks, we're all in on super fights and rematches. I don't know if anybody was more jacked up for Rampage versus Vanderlei Silva 4 than John Franklin. I mean, big Bellator guy. And I know you were all about Chuck Liddell Tito 3. You were there. But in any case, the rumored Conor McGregor Dustin Poirier fight, it's now on the table as January 23rd, 2021. That's been agreed upon by ESPN and the UFC. And Dana White's flipped those contracts over to McGregor and Poirier, but Conor McGregor's adamant that the fight happens in December. So, John, my question to you is, A, is this fight just going to end up fizzling out like Poirier-Diaz did last year? And B, does January make more sense than December to hold a pay-per-view like this?
Yeah. I'll answer B first. I think January makes more sense. Conor started the year this year. I think the further you push it out, the greater likelihood there'll be fans in attendance. That goes into an account when you talk about the UFC. The UFC, I don't want to say they count on the Conor gates, but they enjoy them. So getting a Conor gate is a goal here. In terms of will it go the way of Poirier-Diaz, here's the thing you can never know about Conor McGregor, right? Conor McGregor's playing chess. Everyone else, myself included, is playing checkers. So I guess my question is, what is it that makes December so intriguing for Conor? Is it something like a tax thing? Is it like if I fight in December and the list comes out of the fighters that made the most money in 2020, I'd be on it if I fought in December and not on it if I fought in January? What is his reasoning for wanting to fight in December? Is it because he wants to fight before the holidays? Who knows? I don't know. So this seems to be the major sticking point. Conor wants to fight in December. Dana wants him to fight in January. So, yeah, this fight might go the way of Poirier-Diaz if Conor acts like Nate Diaz does when the negotiations become difficult.
It's a weird one for me. I mean, obviously you want to see the fight, right? But when's the best time to have it? Well, it's not like sometimes they have big fights in December. I mean, we might touch on it, but this weekend you have Brian Ortega, Korean Zombie. Well, the last time we saw Brian Ortega was in December 2018 up in Toronto, Ontario, Canada against Max Holloway. And that was a big pay-per-view card. They like to have big pay-per-view cards. And normally, under regular circumstances, it seems like Ontario ends up with a big card just about every December or thereabouts, which is awesome, except for this year. So for me, do I care? No. Do I want to see the fight? Of course. But it seems like the ESPN deal, they like to spin it into, well, January's the month. You had Conor and Cerrone in January. You had that big stacked first card on ESPN. You had Cejudo and Dillashaw. So it seems like they kind of want to stack the deck right out of the gate. So I understand from the ESPN and UFC perspective, hey, we have this slate of cards that we have to fill for an entire year. We're going to put whatever names we can on it to make it at least halfway profitable to the end of the year. We restart 2021, new fiscal year. I'm assuming that their year end is December. Hey, we've got our money. We've got our ducks in a row. let's have this fight in January. For Conor to turn it down, I don't know. Like you said, is it a tax thing? I don't know. And it all depends on him, because it seems like Dustin Poirier's game to fight. Now, I know he said, I bled for the company, offers have been disrespectful, so on and so forth. So it might take a little bit of a shove in the Poirier camp to get him to either December or January. But I feel like it depends less on him than it does on McGregor at this point.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Craig, in the words of Mugatu and Zoolander, Buckley, so hot right now. Buckley. Joaquin Buckley is the talk of the town. 1 week you're 0-1 with the UFC and an underdog. Next week, Kanye West is releasing a new track over your highlights. So, Craig, if you're the UFC, what do you do to keep the train going with your new star?
I can tell you exactly what you do. So last weekend, Bellator has a guy like Joaquin Buckley. He's a lot more flashy. He's down a weight class. He's been called a can crusher in Michael Venom Page. What does Bellator do with MVP? They put him in a main or a co-main slot, or they put him on a main card that has 3 fights because Bellator is weird. And they put him up against somebody that you probably never heard of. They're definitely going to lose, and it's a showcase for MVP. And they built him into a star. He's one of their main attractions. Now, he just fought on the Bellator 248 card, Ross Houston, former Cage Warriors champ, legit fighter. And before that, he fought Shinjo Abe that used to fight in the UFC. And he's had a fight against Douglas Lima, but he went on Lima's highlight reel. You don't want to have Joaquin Buckley end up on a Douglas Lima type highlight reel. You don't want to put Joaquin Buckley into a marquee fight with a big name middleweight. This guy isn't Khamzat Chimaev. He's not going to fight, a who's who. He's not going to fight Wonder Boy tomorrow and then pop up and fight, pick your fighter, Israel Adesanya, and then bounce down to fight Kamaru Usman. That guy's on this level, Khamzat Chimaev. Joaquin Buckley came in on short notice, lost to Kevin Holland, gave a good account of himself, and we know he's a good fighter from, his time on the regional scene. He came in against Impa Kasanganay, young guy, just started fighting in MMA just a couple of years ago, was undefeated. It's a great win, but do not push this guy way too far. Give him somebody that he's, 90% gonna beat. There's a good chance he's gonna beat him, and just let it be a slow burn. Don't push him too fast.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, listen, I can give you a couple of names right now, Edson Barbosa and Uriah Hall, who had not spinning kick knockouts that were equally or as or maybe more impressive than this. Hall's happened on tough, and Barbosa's happened with a guy that we thought was more than he ended up being. But I guess here's my thing. I mean, for me, I think that if this kid is a one-hit wonder, that's not the worst thing in the world. So what you do is you take advantage of the situation as it is, right? Right now, Buckley's the sizzle, Chimaev is the steak, right? There's two different things here. He had a once-in-a-million kind of knockout, right? But is it more impressive than what Zaire Rodriguez did? Maybe not. So we don't know what this kid has. I say if I'm Dana, I come through, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but I come through on that $200,000. I make it a story. I completely squeeze as much out of this orange as I can, and then just let the kid's career happen as it's going to happen. If you start teeing guys up, I mean, it wasn't like – I think it's a little bit different if he had like a personality that is the reason why people were drawn to him. And then it's like, okay, we can set him up in fights that may lead to some kind of, interesting finishes or impressive, we can kind of tee people up for him. But listen, this was kind of such a fluky thing that I think that, you just kind of ride it, and he ends up being Jeremy Lin or something, then that's who he is. He's just a guy that was hot for a month and then, he moved on. I think if you give him the Uriah Hall treatment, you end up, messing with this kid's head.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy Lin, Toronto Raptors legend, world champion. All right, so John,
comes back to Canada.
Exactly. This would be an episode of Early Stoppage without a mention of either Platinum Mike Perry or Darren the Gorilla Till. And so I'll choose the latter over the former. And this week, Darren Till called out Yoel Romero and Khamzat Chimaev. It was on Saturday, which is cool and all, but he just had a fight announced for December against Jack Hermanson. So Khamzat Chimaev, he met up with the Schmo. It was today the video came out, and he said that he talked to Darren Till, but Chimaev doesn't want to wait until December or longer to have a fight. He wants 4 or 5 fights before the end of the year. Really, he said 3 or 4. Doesn't matter middleweight, doesn't matter welterweight. He's going to smash. So here is the question. You're the UFC, and like with Joaquin Buckley, you've got lightning in a bottle. Who's next for Khamzat Chimaev? Now, we've attacked this from multiple different angles. We talk Leon Edwards. We talk Wonderboy Thompson. Like, is it finally time to throw this guy into the, the top 5 even?
Listen, Dana says, when Dana says people don't want to fight a guy, you do have to take it with a grain of salt, right? So I don't know when he says that, how serious that is based on his results and his performances. I don't think that that people are blowing Dana up to fight this kid. But the names that I've heard, right? We heard Till, we heard Thompson, we heard Edwards, and now we've heard Magny. The most doable fight is probably Magny. The fight I most want to see is probably Thompson or Till. But I guess if you're the UFC, you have to figure out what you want to do. Do you want to risk, losing ground on Darren Till like you did before when Jorge Masvidal got him? Now that makes it interesting because, now you start to set up similar opponents with Masvidal and some other fighters. It gets interesting there. I think that they're probably going to give him Magny, but that's not the fight I want to see the most. I'd rather see Thompson or Till. But listen, Thompson has nothing to gain by fighting him. Till has a little bit to gain by fighting him, but I think Magny's probably going to be the choice.
Magny, I think, is the right pick, and I think it's the most interesting pick, actually, just based on his skill set. You're going to get the most complete MMA fighter out of Neil Magny. Isn't that a weird thing to say over some of those higher-ranked guys? Because, again, with Thompson, his takedown defense is good, but he's a striking specialist. With Darren Till, it's his power punching and his striking that really get him out of a jam. I know they talk about, the underground days when he moved from Liverpool to Brazil, and his ground game's so good, but it's more his Muay Thai is so good than his ground game and his jiu-jitsu. So for me, I want to see Neil Magny, a long-rangey striker, a guy that has really good takedown defense. And when he's on the ground, unless Hector Lombard's raining on top of him, he has pretty good defense. So for me, I think that's definitely a good fight. That's the stepping stone to get you into those top 5 fights. You definitely have to have a fight against a Magny or a Rocco Martin or somebody of that ilk before you get to the very top of the division. So I'm fine with it. It seems like that's the conversation that's happening. That's the fight to make. And that's one of those fights where Magny's not a star, but he's a big enough name that if you wanted to headline a fight night with that fight, I think you can kind of work off of both guys and you don't have to solely depend on Chimaev. Now, how stupid does that sound? It's kind of stupid because Khamzat Chimaev is like your golden goose. I mean, he's the big cheese. I could talk in more and more cliches, but he's the guy that's really going to sell the fight. But I think having Magny there helps out a little bit more. You might gain a little bit more of a U.S. audience. You might, with a win over a guy like Magny, really work it over with the hardcores. So I think that's certainly the fight to make for now anyway.
It gets interesting before we move on because, we talked about this before of like, there's lists of fighters. I judge how good a fighter is based on how much the UFC protects them. And it doesn't mean – now, the other part of that equation is how much money they can make for you, right? So they protect guys like Conor and Masvidal, and they've protected other guys before. But for me, John Jones fought everybody that was available at 205 pounds. George St. Pierre fought everybody that was available at 205 pounds. Anderson Silva fought everybody that was available at 185 pounds. Demetrius Johnson fought everybody that was available at 125 pounds. So my thing is the UFC wasn't worried about protecting them. So what will get interesting for me with Chimaev is how much faith do they have in this guy? Are they willing to just put him in there with anybody? Or do they feel like they have to protect him a little bit? Because as I look, because the question I was going to pose to you is, has Neil Magny ever had a bad night, right? Has anybody ever made him look really, really bad? And you got to go back a minute to like Lorenz Larkin and Rafael Dos Anjos. Now, but here's the thing. With Dos Anjos, you could set up a fight there with Chimaev. If Magny fought Chimaev and looked and Chimaev just ran through him like a finish line, then you could fight. You could at least make the case for him fighting Dos Anjos. So I guess my point is that Magny's the kind of guy that no matter how elite you are, it's tough to have a really good night against him. So that's where I think this Chimaev fight gets interesting.
I mean, and you're right. Like for Magny, when does he look bad? Those are two perfect examples. And like I said, the Hector Lombard first round where he withstood all that pressure, was crazy that fight wasn't ended in that first round. And then to come back and grind out a win. And then the other thing too, RDA is a bit of a tough one where he had the fight scheduled at 55 and now he's out of it. But you're right. I mean, there's all sorts of, that division's weird because there's all sorts of talent, but there's also all sorts of gatekeepers. I mean, Robbie Lawler is going to fight Mike Perry. Sure, maybe they're not ranked, but still, there's a lot of names in there, a lot of older names. You see the Matt Browns popping out every now and again. Like there's a lot of different fights you can make.
All right, Craig. As weird as it may sound, the UFC's light heavyweight champion Jan Blachowicz was on Submission Radio this week to talk shop and revealed that in rematching with Thiago Santos, I want to knock him out, but after the fight, I can go and drink a beer with him. So for me, it's not a problem. I will never drink beer with Rocco because he's an asshole. But Thiago is normal. We're friends. So if you're the UFC, and we talked about this a little bit ago in terms of what's next for Jan Blachowicz, but, you know, is the Santos fight a no-brainer? Do you start to build guys up? Do you bring them up from other divisions? I mean, we saw that not go well with some fighters, but now with the new champion, you got a fresh, set of contenders potentially. How do you play this?
Let's go with an old Luke Rockhold opponent. Apparently everybody hates Luke Rockhold, really. I mean, does he have any friends? Henry Hooft, are you there? Like, I don't know what you do because you have a new crop of fighters that we've seen, the Rakic's, the Prohakshas, and so on and so forth, really start to emerge. People are excited about light heavyweight. I'm going to caution you, though. Your 15th ranked fighter is Paul Craig. So if your 15th ranked fighter is Paul Craig, it's not a good division. I respect Paul Craig, but he's not a great fighter, and he's ranked in the UFC. So that says something. So if it was me, I'm going to do something that everyone would hate. This is a classic Craig move. Remember when Michael Bisping beat Luke Rockhold? What did the UFC do? They had him fight Dan Henderson. Then he had a really long layoff, and he fought George St. Pierre. Do the same thing with light heavyweight. Hold the division up. You lost Corey Anderson. You need more and more stars. Maybe push some guys up for middleweight. Maybe bring in some more talent and try and stack this division with more prospects and names that you already know. Have Yoel Romero move up and have a fight at light heavyweight. And then if he wins, give him a title shot. I know this all sounds ridiculous, but you need to have more fighters than Dominic Reyes and Thiago Santos up at the top looking for a title shot. You saw how it worked out for Reyes against Blachowicz. We don't want to see that again. Jones and Adesanya might have a one-off at 205. That would be fun, but that doesn't really produce a title contender anytime soon. At least I don't think it does, because Adesanya is going to move back to 85. Jones is going to do his thing at heavyweight. Maybe you make a fight between Jones and Blachowicz, but I don't see it. So for me, start stacking this division. It sucks because Blachowicz, 35 years old. Is he in the twilight of his career? No, but he's closer to it than prime or the early portions of his career, the KSWs of his career. So just stack the division. Try and work it up.
Yeah, I always look at fighters in terms of like who needs a belt and who doesn't, right? Jan Blachowicz is the kind of guy that needs a belt. And he's the kind of guy that, if not for the belt, he's on fight nights, even as a champion. I mean, I know that statement kind of makes no sense, but he needs that to prop him up. So yeah, you have some guys that can kind of bide your time here, but you got to bring a guy like you said, Yoel Romero in. You got to have a name. Nobody's really. It doesn't matter how well Thiago Santos fought John Jones. He's not a name. So we got Santos. We got Anthony Smith. We got Dominic Reyes. I mean, that's just not a list of guys that those guys don't walk into a restaurant in Vegas and the person at the front goes, "Come on back, we got a table for you." They have no idea who they are. So the division's interesting, but it's, when you talk about in basketball or baseball or football, are we a contender? Are we reloading? Are we rebuilding? I think I don't think this division is reloading. I think it's rebuilding.
I mean, the fight that Blachowicz had against Santos finished him. Do I want to see it again? Yeah, I do. Of course I do. It was a good fight the first time. It'd be good the second time. I'm a big Thiago Santos guy since I saw him with the spinning wheel kick at UFC Fight Night Halifax, headlined by Derek Lewis and Travis Brown, the night Maro Yamasaki let down Hawaii. But in terms of that division, you're right. I think you got to stack it. And it's not like it used to be 10, 12 years ago. So we'll move on from there, John. And we talked earlier about Conor McGregor and Khabib. Now let's talk about my guy, Georges St-Pierre. The arguable GOAT of MMA came out this week, and he talked about the circumstances it would take for him to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. I'll get into this if you'd like, but I'd like to know what you think the circumstances should be for this fight to take place. I mean, do you see a fight like that happening? I know the ins and outs of kind of the conversation that he had, but for him to have to make a cut, would it make sense?
You know, let me put this in other terms, right? So if you're a guy who does Ironmans, or you're a guy that climbs mountains, right? There's two different sets of criteria. You can either win the Ironman, right, and have all the accolades that comes with that, or you can climb Mount Everest, right? You don't win anything for climbing Mount Everest. You just get to the top. So if you're Georges St-Pierre, you have to look at Khabib Nurmagomedov and say, do I want the accolade, or do I just want the skull? Do I just want to take out Khabib and that's rewarded in itself? Or do I want something that's going to go into a record book, right? And then that becomes how you got to figure this out. Georges St-Pierre has said, you know, this fight was close a couple of years ago. I was prepared to go to 55 then. I'm really not prepared to go to 55 now. I'm older. He's 39. He doesn't know if he can make that cut. For me, I don't know if this fight has any cachet unless it's for the 55-pound belt. Yes, Georges St-Pierre and Khabib Nurmagomedov fighting each other is going to be a big fight. But how do you make it a main event without a belt? And if your St-Pierre is just beating Khabib Nurmagomedov enough, you know, it's like when we're trying to figure out this whole Israel Adesanya John Jones thing. Well, if John Jones is a heavyweight and Israel Adesanya is a middleweight, even if Jones is the champ at heavyweight and then Adesanya is the champ at middleweight, how do you meet at 205 if there's another champion? You know, where do we put that fight? Do we just say, okay, there's no, you know, maybe we just say to hell with it, have a dream card and put Khabib and Georges St-Pierre and Jones and Adesanya on the same card, and then we don't need belts. So I think it gets interesting. I'd like to see the fight, but I honestly, and this is going to sound super ridiculous, I really only want to see it if the 55 belt's on the line, because then George is the first triple champ.
Yeah, I mean, do I want to see it? Not necessarily. I look at it, and this is going to sound ridiculous too. It's like if Michael Jordan was sitting on the sidelines and he goes, geez, you know, LeBron's got 4 titles and I've got more titles than he does. Let's just come back and play one more season. Screw it. I don't care how old I am. I've got a commentary gig. I own the Charlotte Hornets, the commentary gig obviously being GSPs with RDS in Canada, but I just want to come back and, you know, beat him just to prove that I can. That one's a little more ridiculous than this one is. This one's a little bit more believable. But for Georges St-Pierre to, you know, to want to, this late in his career, to want to move down to 55, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. For Khabib, if he had to move up to 70, all right, you know, we kind of meet in the middle, so to speak, if there's even a middle to it. I don't need to see it. It's not a fight that legacy-wise for either guy, am I going to hold them in higher regard? Well, if Khabib wins, you beat Georges St-Pierre that was retired, that might have drained himself. If GSP wins, well, then, yeah, I guess it's an even bigger deal. But you're just adding to the GOAT conversation that I think he's already so far ahead. I don't see it making the biggest amount of difference, but there's definitely the conversation to be had.
Well, it's a little bit self-serving, and I like the Michael Jordan example because it's like Jordan when he played for the Wizards. If you're not coming back to a title contender, what the hell are you coming back for? Just to say that you can do it? Just to say that you can average 20 a game? You know, it's not quite if GSP came back to fight Neil Magny. That would be completely pointless, kind of like Jordan with the Wizards. Just to say I can still do it. I can still go 5 rounds. I can still beat a top 10 welterweight or whatever. That's completely pointless in my opinion. This is not that because, again, Khabib is still Khabib. But if, you know, this sounds not – it doesn't sound that crazy. But, like, if you're going to fight Khabib, why not do it for the 55-pound belt? And I understand going down to 55 may make you diminish to the point where you couldn't beat him. Or maybe you could beat him at 70 or if by some craziness you talked him up to 85. I doubt that. But – yeah, I get it. Georges St-Pierre has a very big decision to make now, which is, if I'm going to fight this guy, what's the best way to fight him? And is beating him enough? Is just beating him enough? And only he knows that.
All right, John, we've got a new segment this week to the show, yet to be named, but we've got one. So you'll see a graphic for it. But really, I wanted everybody to kind of reach out. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Fight Night Picks to get your questions in. We've got a video submission this week from friend of the show, Max Friedman. So let's kick it to Max, and here's question.
What's up, Craig, John, the early Stoppage crew? Love that we got the burning questions back. What I'm asking to you guys this week, with a lot of slots open on the November Contender Series, who are some of the prospects you guys want to see fill out those cards? Looking forward to hearing your answer.
All right, John. So regional MMA. What do you know about regional MMA? What do you know about worldly regional MMA?
I know that, well,
one.
First of all, let's get a few things out of the way before we even get into this, because I'm gonna participate in this, the answer to this question very minimally. This is your neck of the woods, and I will let you definitely guide us through there. But I have one question. Can we get the Fight Night Picks legal team on, does Max Friedman have a no-compete clause? And if so, when is it done? Because I would like to maybe bring Max Friedman into the fold. I don't know what his contract status is with any other potential entity. Let's get the legal team on it. But Craig, let's get back to the question at hand, which is, what do you see down the road for Dana White's Contender Series?
I mean, there's still a lot of great prospects out there, especially under 30. So that's kind of what I wanted to focus on. And the easiest way to do this, and I'm sure, Max, you've done it before, and fight fans out there, you've done it before, head on to Tapology, go into the rankings, and then from there, just try to pick out some of the fighters that really, I guess, speak to you, that have fought decent competition. Then you got to go back, you got to watch some of their fights. And it's one of those interesting questions where sometimes it's hard to find fight tape. So I will say this right here now. Matt and I have kind of focused on this, especially with the fight that KB Buller had against Tom Breeze. In terms of grinding my gears, when I watched the UFC broadcast and they said last weekend, geez, it was tough to find tape on KB Buller. And one of the guys said, oh, yeah, I saw a knockout that he had one time, but that was about it. Go to Fight TV. If you have to pay for unified MMA shows, do it. It's your job. You got to know who these guys are. So that's me being a bit of a dink. But in terms of watching fights from some of these guys, I'm going to throw some names out at you. Finland's Abba Abdul Hussein. He's 7-1. Young guy coming at you, fighting with Brave. He's got one loss on his record to Narwas Abzak, who's 6-1 at the time. Since 2018, 3 wins in a row, 2 ninja chokes in a row. He's supposed to fight Amir Albazi earlier on this year that you saw in the UFC, and he's supposed to fight Zach Makovsky just last month in September. That fight obviously fell out, Brave CF 42. So that's a guy you should be watching. Rafa Garcia, what about gifted Rafa Garcia? He's 12-0. I know sometimes it's tough to get combate guys, but I mean, he's 26 years old, fighting out of Team Punisher. He's highly ranked in all the different categories from Mexico, Latin America, Arizona, U.S. Southwest. His last fight at Combate 55 for the Combate Lightweight Championship, he beat Humberto Bandenay, former UFC guy. You've seen all sorts of finishes on his record as well. So Rafa Garcia, there's another name. A guy that's got a fight coming up this week, Jackson Tortora Loureiro or Lujejo. I hope I pronounced that at least somewhat close, but out of Brazil, he's 11-1-1. He's only 25 years old, coming out of Chuta Box in Brazil. This guy's really impressive. I had to go back and watch some of his fights. He's 6 feet tall at lightweight. He's got a fight coming up in a couple of days against Elsmar Lima, and that guy's another big name on the Brazilian regional scene. They will be fighting for the vacant FFC featherweight championship. So moving down to featherweight, his last fight was with SBC for their lightweight championship. If you're looking for a guy on the regional scene that's kind of facing the champions from other organizations, kind of going around the world, that really speaks volumes, especially to a Contender Series type of audience. So if Jackson gets the win this week, maybe expect him to pop up on the radar. Another guy that I really like, fighting at a UFD gym in Dusseldorf. They've got a lot of good prospects that we've seen come through the cage. Milos Jancic. Hopefully, again, that one was somewhat close to the pronunciation. I went back and watched his last fight from July against Tonchi Perusco. And boy, Tanchi did not have good takedowns. He really went into a double leg pretty sloppy. And our guy here, Milos Jancic, had a really nice guillotine, locked it up. His only loss at KSW 51 to Roman Zemansky. So that's a big guy that we could see possibly fighting. He's got a fight coming up actually tonight at welterweight against Ivan Sakic. So there's a guy to watch out for. Shane Campbell, a guy that people would recognize from his time in the UFC, most recently competed in 2016, had a bit of a salty run at 1-4. But I mean, he's got wins over Tristan Connolly on his record. He's on a 2-fight win streak, finished Dewan Pinkney back at Unified MMA 39 at a catchweight of 165, super lightweight. So Shane Campbell. And the last guy that I'm going to leave you with, and this is going to be my best, this is a try, coming out of Johannesburg, South Africa, Iga Cabeza at 12-1, Smiley, great nickname, 26 years old. He's a featherweight at 5'9", and this guy's faced some decent competition. His only loss on his record was 3 years ago against Danny Henry, who's now in the UFC. That one for their featherweight belt. His last time out, picked up a really quick first round knockout win to keep his featherweight title. So he's another young guy to look out for. Like I said, 26 years old. The sky's the limit with a guy like that. So I'm really excited about a lot of these prospects, majority of them under 30 years old. I know Shane Campbell, a bit of a blast from the past. He is 32 at this point. And maybe one other guy that's 28 years old, Taylor Lapilus. I mean, the guy's on a 3-fight win streak. He beat Josh Hill in 2018, who's now with Bellator, the gentleman. He beat Nate Maness. He finished him. He's in the UFC now. And a big win over Marcos Breno. And I don't know, Taylor Lapilus, where he's with Aries FC, if that's kind of one of those contracts where you can hop over and have a fight with the UFC. But that was a guy that went 1-3 with the promotion, beat Rocky Lee, beat Ulka Sasaki, lost to Eric Perez, beat Leandro Issa, and then he was out of the UFC. So Taylor Lapilus is one of those guys. Put me in, coach. I'm ready to play, and I'd like to see him back. So, John, hopefully that wasn't too much of me rambling, but those are some of the prospects that I'm excited about. I'm going to throw a question at you. This one's from Will on Instagram. He says, is Zombie next 1,000% for Volkanovski if he claps Ortega?
The Henry Cejudo of it all is always going to sort of be over top of anything that's going on with Volkanovski, because Cejudo, while retired, never stops talking about the fact that he wants the Volkanovski fight. Obviously, the Volkanovski fight would be very attractive for the UFC. So from that perspective, that to me is the one thing that's kind of getting in the way of it all. But, we talked about this earlier in terms of fights not having 2 stars, right? I don't know that I'm comfortable, even with his proximity to Israel Adesanya, labeling Volkanovski anywhere near a star. So the UFC is not really in the business of putting together fights with 2 B-sides. And that's what Volkanovski and Zombie would be. That's the problem with it. Now, is Zombie's one of those guys, Bud? Here's what I think. He's one of those guys I went with Bud.
Okay, Dad.
He's one of those guys. He's one of those guys that, everybody knows his name, but no one can pick him out of a lineup. So I don't quite know how that's going to help him in terms of marketing. So, yeah, I think that if Cejudo falls through, yes, that's the fight, unless Brian Ortega does something amazing.
I think Dana White said here in the last week or so a few times that the winner of this fight would get Volkanovski. Cejudo, yeah, you're right. That is a bit of a tricky one. I don't know how you kind of stick handle that, but I mean, Brian Ortega claims he's a totally new fighter after the layoff. I know these guys were supposed to fight last December. Ortega was out due to a knee injury, so he's back. Totally new camp, all revamped, this and that. So I'm excited to see what Brian Ortega we get. Maybe goes the Jorge Gurgel route, and he's Bangkok ready. But I don't know. I'm excited for the fight. I think it'll be a good one. I appreciate the question, Will. I think, yeah, if Zombie wins, 1,000%. If Ortega wins, 99%. I think that's fair. So the next one from Branch Above, who says, who do you think Michael Chandler fights first? And how do you think his career in the UFC plays out? Now, I want to say this because we leave this to the end of the show. It's always start the conversation, shouts to MMA Reddit. On MMA Reddit, I threw out the second to last podcast episode, just the podcast that's on Spotify. And the question in the title there was, do you think that the UFC is setting up Michael Chandler? Holy smokes, did MMA Reddit have a field day with that? Oh, casuals. You always say that until they win. Well, give me a better example. I mean, Justin Gaethje did it. Won some, lost some, and then found his footing. But how many other fighters have we seen transplanted from one organization to the other and find either immediate success or crash and burn? Because to me, it's Bellator fighters. It's at lightweight. Eddie Alvarez is your best case, and Will Brooks is your worst case.
Yeah, I mean, so in answer to the question, I think the obvious answer would come from, okay, let me just give you the quick answer. The quick answer is Kevin Lee. I think Kevin Lee's a perfect fight for Michael Chandler because he's a big enough name and he's had good enough nights that if Chandler loses to him, one of the things that Justin Gaethje benefited from was he went in there with hitters from Jump Street. So if he lost, it's like, okay, he's in here with world champions. It's not like we're putting him in here with a prospect or somebody we're not sure about. The example being, if you put Michael Chandler in there with Beneil Dariush, as good of a fighter as he is, if Chandler loses that fight, he looks bad. It's a bad look for him. Now, if you put him in there with like Paul Felder, if you can lure him out of retirement, then that's not bad. Put him in there with Duke Bronx, but I think that's a bad matchup. Anybody above that, you risk hurting the fighter that Chandler's fighting. You want to be able to help Chandler and keep him away from these kind of guys. Like you put him in there with Hangman Hooker, you could end up, having Hooker lose some shine. Put him in there with Tony Ferguson, same thing. So I think for me, the easy answer is Kevin Lee. My second answer would be luring Paul Felder out of retirement.
The other thing too, like, you talk about fighters coming into the UFC, big splash, whatever. Ben Askren's the other guy. I mean, he had the fight against Robbie Lawler, as controversial as it was, and then he set himself up for one of the greatest knockout highlights in UFC history. Unfortunately, it was Jorge Masvidal's. And then the Damian Maia fight that's incredibly forgettable because he just didn't show up. And I mean, yeah, he was there, but he got mopped. So who do I think he fights first? I actually think he's going to fight way higher in the ranks. I think Ferguson's the fight to make, especially if it's Conor Poirier, it's Gaethje, Khabib. Well, who's left without a partner? It's Tony Ferguson. And how do I think his UFC career plays out? I'm a big Michael Chandler guy. I'm a big Bellator guy. I'm a big Michael Chandler guy. I'm a big Bellator guy. I don't see him having a ton of success. I mean, if Patricio Freire is finishing you only a few years ago, then I don't see it working out all that great. I mean, that's a small featherweight moving up to lightweight and finishing you. And I mean, Michael Chandler's been finished. He's been rocked in fights. Who hasn't? But he's been in some wars too. And he's later on in his career. I don't see him having the kind of success that he could have 3-4 years ago.
All right, Craig, let's move on to sparring sessions. I want to talk to you about $200,000, right? It's a lot of money. Doesn't matter who you are. If you got money, it's still a lot of money. So $200,000 was dangled in two different ways this week. First by Dana White, and secondly by Ali Abdelaziz. The context of that is that Dana White said that he was going to give Joaquin Buckley $200,000. It's not been confirmed that he did that yet as a performance bonus for his, viral knockout. So, and then Ali Abdelaziz said that he would give $200,000 to Tony Ferguson if he fought Islam Makhachev. So my question for you is, what is a better investment of $200,000? Dana's or Ali Abdelaziz's?
Probably Dana's is a show of good faith, because in an age where everybody's talking about the fact that UFC doesn't pay enough, for him to reward great performances, I think that probably speaks volumes, especially if you're a fighter that went through the ranks of, the LFAs, the CSs, the CFFCs, the Titan FCs, the lower leagues to get yourself on, give yourself an opportunity. Then you go on Contender Series where you're forced to have, a wild performance because you have to wow the boss. And then you go into the UFC, you've already got a bad contract because you're coming in on probably 10-10 or 12-12. They don't really give bigger contracts than that for the Contender Series fighters. And then you put on a performance like that. for Dana White to come to the back and say, hey, you know, I'm going to give you the 200,000. We're giving you all the bonuses. Thanks for your hard work. I think that incentivizes a lot more fighters that aren't ranked to put on performances like that, or to want to put on performances that are going to catch the attention of the ESPNs, like the big ESPNs. They're a little forced now because UFC's there, but you catch my drift. The sports centers, I mean, this knockout was everywhere. So who's to say, you know, a lower ranked fighter or fighter making their debut after seeing that doesn't go, geez, well, if they're giving, you know, Joaquin Buckley 200,000, who's to say that I can't get 200,000 if I don't go balls to the wall? So for me, it says a lot more there versus a manager saying, hey, I'll give you $200,000 shady money to fight my guy. Like, that's just weird.
You know, it is a little weird. I mean, I'm with you. I think that the performance bonuses accomplish a couple of things. One, it's like a sales job, right? When you have a sales job, they say, well, you make money based on what you bring in. Dana's saying you're going to get bonuses based on how exciting you fight. We're not guaranteeing you anything. You know, Dana is really a amalgamation of a lot of different people, but you could say Donald Trump, you could say Vince McMahon. And one of the things Vince McMahon says is, I don't give you anything but an opportunity, right? So that's kind of what Dana's saying here. He's saying that I'm not going to give you this huge contract. There's not guaranteed money. Yes, you will have your contract, and yes, it will have a show bonus and a win bonus, but there's a lot of contingencies there, right? You have to win, obviously, and then you have to perform well to get the bonus. So I'm with you. I think that this would be my analogy. If your neighbor won the lottery, would you be more inclined to play the lottery? You'd think the odds of neighbors winning the lottery would be low, but there'd also be this thing where my neighbor won it. So it's like a proximity thing. So if Dana gives $200,000 to a guy who's kind of like where you're at in the world of MMA, maybe you fought him in the regionals, or maybe you're in the same division as he is, it does incentivize people to do to maybe make that happen. Now, the larger question I have for you is do you think that any of this is going to lead to some sort of a change in the way that things are done? Like, do you think that let's get into even maybe the legalities of doing that. Do you think that that's something that managers should do? Do you think that that's something that, I mean, if Dana's incentivizing fighters in the way that he is with performance bonuses, is it fair to say, I'm going to pay you off the books for you to fight my guy?
I'm sure it happens. We just don't hear about it. Really? I mean, you know, I'm sure it happens. I'm sure there's backroom deals. I'm sure there's stuff that the athletic commissions don't know about. I mean, geez, there's athletic commissions that don't release payouts. So yeah, I'm sure things like that happen for various different reasons. But is it a good thing? Maybe not. But I think when you put it on a grand scale like that, like, you know, it's almost like you're working for Jordan Belfort to a certain extent. Like, we can have these wild office parties if there's people getting finishes like this. I think it's ultimately a good thing. I mean, you can kind of compare it, and I've heard the comparisons be made to like a bounty gate. Well, I like Greg Williams, especially when he was with my Cleveland Browns. Am I all right with bounty gate? Does it make a better product on the field? You're damn right it does. So am I fine with this? Yeah. Am I fine with steroids in professional sports? To an extent, not combat sports. But again, I'm a weird guy. Do I want to see juiced up guys throwing 150-mile-an-hour fastballs and hitting 600-foot moonshots? Fuck yeah, I do. So am I all right with stuff like this? Yeah, I'm fine with it.
All right, Craig, let's move on. Let's talk about, there's something interesting. We have all these kind of segments that we do that are kind of off the wall or crazy. This one is one that's way out there. I'm a huge fan of The West Wing. I binge watched the entire series a couple of years ago, and now I've begun to do it again. Part of the reason why I binge watched it a couple of years ago is because who was going into the White House, and I'm binge watching it again because of a couple of reasons. One, who's still in the White House, and two, they're doing a reunion tomorrow night on HBO Max for a charity that gets people out to vote. So I thought it might be fun to recast The West Wing with MMA fighters. There's one of two ways you can do this. Either I can tell you who played the role on The West Wing, and you can do it that way, or we could just look at this like if the MMA world were a country and we were giving all these people jobs, what would you do? So let's just see where it goes. I haven't written anything down ahead of time. I'm just going to kind of organically, we'll come together and figure things out. First and foremost, who do you think would be the president in MMA?
We've attacked this before. So, president of MMA. Well, if it's MMA and it's not the UFC and former securities filings don't matter, Chael Sonnen's my guy. But for him to be the president of like a UFC, legally it probably can't happen. But Chael Sonnen's my pick. I mean, it seemed like he was maybe not getting groomed for the position when he was in the UFC, but you kind of felt like maybe it could happen someday. Now it probably won't. But Chael Sonnen's my guy, which is a shame because your answer is probably going to be the same thing or a little bit different. But he's my guy.
I'm with you. And I guess initially we have to make a couple of decisions. Do we take guys who are actually could run for office out of the equation, like Brian Stan or Tim Kennedy or something like that? So if we do take those out of the equation, I'm looking at this a little bit differently than you are. You're looking at like if MMA as a company had a president, who would be that president? I'm looking at it like if there's a country and you're picking people from MMA to run that country. So we're going to come to the same answer. So I'll say Chael Sonnen as well, just to keep things interesting. But now if Chael's your president, who should be your vice president?
Well, if we're looking at it to run your country, because this is the way that your country's set up, it's not the way that my country's set up. So if I want it to be your country, maybe Sean O'Malley is your vice president. Make things fun, make things a little spicy, a little interesting, because we don't have to deal with it in Canada. But if it was a running mate to Chael Sonnen, I don't know, Ben Askren.
That would be interesting. That would certainly be, yeah. I wouldn't hate that. I think sometimes the vice president isn't exactly like the president. So I would like maybe DC in this spot. We've talked about them before. Carlos Condit might be a good vice president. There's some guys, when I'm thinking about this, John Jones might be a good vice president. I don't know that he would accept being vice president to Chael's president. Here's where it gets interesting. The chief of staff. Chief of staff is the guy who has the president's ear, runs things for the president, keeps his agenda going. I'm going to lead with this one. I think a great chief of staff would be Dominic Cruz.
I was going to say Rich Franklin.
I don't hate that. So far, okay. Let's start to talk about our cabinet here, right? So if the president's Chael Sonnen, we got the vice president. Let's go with either someone like DC or Condit. They're kind of cut from similar cloth. Our chief of staff is so we'll do this because I want to kind of link this up with the West Wing because I'm going to put the pictures side by side when I edit it. So let's do this. If you're saying Rich Franklin and I'm saying Dominic Cruz, there's directors and deputies. So here's what we'll do. The chief of staff will be Dominic Cruz. The deputy chief of staff will be Rich Franklin. Let's talk about the communications director. The communications director is the person who handles the message of the group. What are we talking about? What's important? What matters? Who would make a good communications director?
I'm going to cherry pick off of my Rich Franklin answer, and these two are linked up. It's probably because they both worked for one championship, but I think that this person would make for a good communications director. Former UFC women's bantamweight champ, Miesha Tate. I think Miesha Tate would be great for the job. And I wish we get to see a little bit more Miesha Tate in North America. I feel like we don't.
I am doing this based in no way on everyone having to be an American. This is the first time I'm gonna go away from an American here. I like your choice, and since you gave me the main spot last time, and I gave you the deputy, Miesha Tate will be the communications director. Deputy communications director is Michael Bisping. I would also accept Paul Felder in this spot, but I think deputy communications director is Michael Bisping. Now, in look, in the way they fight, in the way they think, take all these things into account and tell me who you think the Secretary of Defense should be.
Popek Monster. Popek Monster is your Secretary of Defense. If you've never seen Popek Monster, Google Popek Monster. Nobody would want to F with you unless they're a legitimate MMA heavyweight. Then they probably do. But Popek Monster, probably the scariest person you could have for Secretary of Defense. And if I had to go with a legit pick, it's a cheat, and it's a name that we already brought up. Probably going to be Brian Stan or Tim Kennedy, right?
I like Francis Ngannou in this spot. I like Stipe Miocic in this spot. I'll put my baddest man on the planet in the Secretary of Defense spot. I threw this one in here for a very specific reason, and it's because of the issues that we have in MMA. Who would be your Secretary of Labor?
Either Leslie Smith, because I talk about her a lot, or Angela Hill. I think those two would be good at bringing forth issues that fighters have. And I think Angela Hill would either be in the running for communications director or secretary of labor, but I'll just go because I already filled the spot for communications director. I'll go Angela Hill, secretary of labor.
I like both of those choices. I don't want to step on them. We've had this discussion before. I wouldn't mind Dustin Poirier in the spot. Leslie Smith or Angela Hill are perfect for the job as well. All right, last but not least, press secretary. They communicate the most with the press. I have a couple of interesting ones here, but I want to get your thoughts.
I have zero idea who I'm going with here. Do we want somebody that's absolutely ridiculous or somebody that's a little bit, more reserved that takes some time?
I'll give you a couple of options here. We could go with Megan O'Leary. We could go with the Schmo. That'd be interesting. We could go with Jorge Masvidal. We could go with, people that communicate with. So it depends. Do you want your press conferences to be interesting, or do you want them to be very buttoned down? I mean, you could Kamaru Usman. You could go with Colby Covington. You go with Colby Covington. That's a thought. So of all the people I listed, who would you put as your press secretary?
I mean, I'm still trying to think of a hipster pick. I would say, Laura Sanko, Megan O'Leary.
Laura Sanko would be the hipster pick.
Yeah, maybe Jen Brown from Bellator. Maybe.
Interesting. I like all of them. So I'll pick one out when we do the graphics. All right, let's move on. Let's go to For the Gram. I kind of had one I wanted to talk about with Blachowicz and Jones. I feel like we covered that earlier. So I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here. It came out this week that John Jones confirmed the hiding under the cage story that Chael Sonnen said a couple years ago when USADA showed up. I have a very simple question for you on this one. Why? Why would what does John Jones have to gain by confirming that story?
Absolutely nothing. And you're incriminating yourself. And I don't know what the statute of limitations are on something like that, but it seems really stupid. Like, that seems like a story that you tell when you're like 45 and you're at a bar. Like, that's the type of story that you tell. It's not the type of story that you just send into a tweet and put out there for the universe to see while you're still an active competitor with aspirations of either fighting Adesanya or making a move to heavyweight and ultimately winning another belt. Seems like something that's really stupid. Damages your career. But for John Jones, I mean, that's pretty well par for the course. So what's the motive? I don't know. I mean, it generated more of a conversation. We're talking about it, but it seems like something really stupid to say.
The only thing that makes any sense to me is that he did it just to get control back of the narrative and not have it be something people could throw in his face. Now, if you're ever going to do that, you shouldn't pick something that's criminal to do it, or something where you could be suspended, or whatever, something that's against the rules. There's ways to get the narrative back. And he's been, I mean, if you're going to score him and Adesanya on Twitter, I would probably say it's 10-9 Jones. Maybe I haven't been paying attention. It seems to me like he's a little bit in the driver's seat. He does seem a little preoccupied with Izzy, so from that, he's showing weakness in that respect. So yeah, Izzy's definitely in his head. But I do think in the exchanges, he's maybe doing a little bit better. So I don't know. I mean, John Jones is a weird guy. I mean, he's got some addiction in his past. I don't know if he's making amends. You really can't tell with him if he's just trying to be as honest as he can. I think that, John Jones seems like the kind of guy. He did the same thing with the cocaine a couple weeks ago where he's like, yeah, I do cocaine. So what do you want? So I don't know if he's just throwing a lot of stuff out there to further say that this was said in sarcasm. Obviously, I wouldn't admit to doing cocaine, and obviously I wouldn't admit to hiding. Maybe that's just his way of saying, oh, yeah, it's all true. Everything that's ever said about me is all true. So that then it's a way of desensitizing people. It's a Trump move to just, you just say whatever. If you say, one of the things that Trump does very effectively is he says he admits to certain things and then just minimizes them. Yeah, we did that. What's the big deal? I talked to the Russians. Who cares? And I think that that's kind of maybe what John Jones is doing here. All right, let's move on to one Twitter hitter. Let's talk about John Jones's most recent flirtation, Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya came out, Craig, and said he believes homophobia led to overreactions about post-fight celebration at UFC 253. I don't mean to laugh, and I'll explain to you why I laughed. What are your thoughts on him using that as the reason why he's got so much backlash?
I don't like that. Let's say you get into a schoolyard fight when you're a kid. And if I get into a fight in the schoolyard as a kid, it never happened. But if it did, I get the shit kicked out of me. Let's say that the guy or gal that beats me, but in this case, let's say it is a guy, just goes direct for, they want that Mortal Kombat finish and they go for a hump. What? Why? Like, I had questions about it when it happened. Why are you doing this? It just seems like a silly thing to do. So I don't think homophobia led to overreactions. I didn't get the post-fight. Like, who does that? Why are you doing this? What's the reasoning behind it? Obviously, there were a lot of emotions going into the fight, but I don't think homophobia is the reason why people didn't like the celebration. I don't understand. Why would you do that? It just seems like not the thing to do.
Well, I think that it's taking the focus off of you and putting it somewhere else. It's saying that yes,
it's not fair.
It isn't, but it's him redirecting the narrative. And we talk about that with all these guys of like who could and not for nothing, we could have made Israel Adesanya the press secretary or the communications director. He's very effective at getting his message out, and that's what I think he's doing here. I think he's saying, "Oh, you're just saying that because I'm very I don't like it when people say that people play the race card. But I will say this, that when you even introduce that into the discussion, it shifts the discussion to something else, right? On either side, the person accusing it or the person potentially doing it, it shifts things around. And I think, Adesanya was wise to do one of two things. Either in saying that he thinks it was homophobic to have a problem with his post-fight celebration to me, that would mean that he was being pro-homosexual in doing this celebration. Like that was his goal. His goal was like, I just beat Paulo Costa in a fight and I'm going to make love to him. That would be the counteraction to you thinking it's homophobic. So my point is that, it's smart of him to sort of shift the narrative. And also he introduced something where most people are like, you know what? I don't even you and I, we get to subjects like this and we go, do we even want to talk about this? Like, is this even, he gets people nervous. He gets people a little skittish. And then that way they're able to say, I don't even want to deal with this. All right, Craig, let's move on let's wave to our parents and grandparents, tell them hello.
Hi, Mom.
We're going to go to posting the book where we talk about, Facebook type content. Fabricio Werdum says a rematch with him and Fedor Emelianenko. The talks and negotiations for that are really advanced. So we talked earlier about GSP. What are the circumstances under which you'd want to see this fight? What promotion? What location? Do you care about it at all? What are your thoughts?
What promotion? It's Cokerville, baby. It's got to happen with Bellator. Do I want to see a rematch? Yeah, why not? I mean, Fabricio Werdum looked pretty good against Gustafsson in his last fight. And Fedor knocked out Rampage, kind of. So you got the narrative of a rematch. I mean, where were you the first time they fought?
Where was I the first time they fought? It's been a while.
Yeah, I know. I wasn't watching Strikeforce at the time. I can tell you that. So for me, I'm fine with it. It's better than one of the fights that we talked about to open the show, like a Rampage Vanderlei Silva 4. It's not that far. It's in that Legends category, obviously. But I'm fine with it. I'd like to see it. I mean, what are you going to get for damage out of these two guys? Well, you're probably going to get Werdum searching for a submission. We haven't really seen that great Muay Thai that I'd say got him to the dance, but ultimately was his demise when he took on Miocic. And from Fedor, he's still quick on his feet. I mean, he gets finished, but he's quick on his feet. So, yeah, I'm fine with it. And I think Bellator is the right place. And the real question is, do you have this on a Thursday night card? Like we have a card tomorrow. Chris Cyborg is going to fight Arlene Blenko. So is it a Thursday card? Is it a Saturday card? Is it going to be on the first half of a double header of cards where there's an hour and a half intermission for the 2 fights in the main card, like Bellator did in Paris? I see the look on your face. These are strange things that Bellator does. So what kind of weird Bellator move are we going to get? I don't know, but I'm fine with the fight.
Yeah, listen, here's my thing about fights, and it's not a popular thing, but it's my thoughts on it, which is if 2 guys want to fight, far be it for me to stand in their way. And all I want to know, all I think is the purpose of a commission. And listen, if commissions did this all the time, we would have never got Conor and Floyd. And I'm happy we got it, and I'm fine with it. But the job of a commission is to ensure that the 2 fighters who are fighting are on a level where they should be fighting each other. And if you are as privy to Dana White's DMs as we are now, thanks to Conor McGregor, not all fights are worthy of keeping your promoter's license. So for me, if I was in a bar and a 70-year-old man wants to fight, I'm fine with it, as long as he's fighting another 70-year-old man. I don't want him picking a fight with a 40-year-old. So that's my point, is that if these guys are of a similar level, I'm fine with them getting a paycheck. I'm fine with having faith in their ability to protect themselves, and I'm all for it. All right, Craig, let's give shouts to MMA Reddit. Love us or hate us. Hate us or love us, the underdogs are on top. Shouts to the game. We'll keep trying to get your attention. Craig, this week, Laura Sanko had her own presser-style interview with those who made the trip to Abu Dhabi, and one of the major takeaways was that she's all in on the UFC adopting a women's atomweight division. We've seen plenty of fighters take a shot at the UFC, but moving up to strawweight and not fighting to their fullest potential. In her words, if you're looking to tap into markets like China, like the rest of Asia, there are a lot of atomweight women over there. Craig, with more and more talent being added to the UFC roster to make up for travel restrictions and the need for more talent based on the amount of cards that need to be pumped out, is it more a question of when will the UFC add an atomweight division rather than why? And I guess my other thing I would add to this as a caveat is, there's talk about getting rid of this division, or do we do 165? Do we move things around? This makes a lot of sense, right? And I guess my other question real quick is, can you promote an atomweight division?
Yeah, you can. Why couldn't you? I mean, it seems like the most likely division to be added. And like we said, we talk about super lightweight at 165. Would I be cool with that? Yeah, I would. Would I be cool with cruiserweight at 225? I mean, you saw Chris Daukaus at 227 fighting Rodrigo Nascimento last weekend. He weighed in 265 and fought a guy that was 227. Those guys that weigh in consistently, like to 225, 230, are incredibly competitive these days in the heavyweight division. Why not give them their own division? But women's atomweight's where it's at. And I mean, I put a few examples down, but Jinyu Frey took on Loma Lookboonmee a couple of weeks ago. And it was a fight where, all right, this is a strawweight fight and it's marketed as such, but really these are 2 atomweights fighting at strawweight. And there's not much in terms of competition that we can put them against, because they're going to be so much smaller and at such a disadvantage against the rest of the strawweight division. So for me, you have those 2. You have Michelle Watterson. You have Seohee Ham that fought with the UFC, but she didn't get a fair shake because she's a huge deal in atomweight in Asia. But when you move her to strawweight, again, disadvantage. Hamasaki's another one. So there's all sorts of fighters and there's all sorts of women in atomweight. One Championship has a great atomweight division. Road FC has atomweight fighters. Ryzen has atomweight fighters. And the list goes on and on and on. There's such a talent-rich pool that I think if you could capture the market like that, you already have the Performance Institute in Shanghai that you want to try and highlight somehow. It's more a question, again, of when than why with that Performance Institute. You're going to start to see stars coming out of there. But I think the atomweight division, it makes perfect sense, especially where you have those promotions that I was talking about starting to gain market share in a huge area where fight sports are already a big deal. It's not like, the NHL wants to go to China, so they send the LA Kings to play the Calgary Flames. Who gives a fuck? They're not going to make a dent. Like, Wayne Gretzky's an ambassador. That's awesome. But you're probably not going to grow hockey in China to a huge extent. Maybe it'll happen someday. I hope it does, but you probably won't. MMA, though, is a sport that I really think you can gain on and capitalize on. And I think women's atomweight is a great starting point. You have a way bigger pool than you do women's featherweight that you barely market. So a question of when than why. And hopefully the when becomes 2021, if not late 2020.
Well, just to give you some context, what a lot of people don't know is Laura Sanko fought. She didn't fight very long. She won those as a professional, and she fought at Atomweight. She fought in Invicta 4, was scheduled to fight in Invicta 6, and had to pull out of that fight because she was pregnant. So she has a unique perspective here, right? So, I mean, most people, even if she doesn't have like a very long career, she I believe commentated for Invicta. So she knows the Atomweights. I'm going to throw something crazy at you. Do you think Laura Sanko would fight if they had an Atomweight division just to get it some popularity?
When was the last time she fought?
2013.
I mean, she's still trained. She's still active with Glory Fitness and MMA. I know there were a lot of questions. And she even said in this interview, my guys, Jonathan Martinez, James Krause, I find that a little like it's tough to try and get over mentally because you're commentating, talking about these fights, but you have a lot of teammates that are there. It's the same thing happens like DC and AKA fighters or Paul Felder and Rufus Sport fighters. It's always weird hearing that. But I mean, she's still active in the community. She still trains. So if they gave her a fight against somebody that didn't have a ton of experience, yeah, I mean, it'd be an easy way to market it, right?
Is it too far of a bridge to cross? And you know me, dude. I throw crazy stuff out. Sanko against Michelle Watterson to inaugurate the division.
Yeah, way too crazy.
Yeah. They're too far apart.
That's not even like Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather.
So nobody gets to keep their promoter's license if they do that fight? Listen, I'm interested in it. I think that I will say this, and I know that it's different, but I don't think you should have another women's division until you start doing right by 45. So that's my problem. If you're not gonna populate 45, now are there more atomweight fighters in the world than featherweight fighters in the world for women? Probably. But still, I think that I would feel bad bringing another division when featherweight is not really given the attention it deserves. All right, guys, there you have it. Another episode of Early Stoppage is in the books. Be sure and comment and subscribe under the video. Let us know what you'd like to see next from the show here on YouTube, but also on iTunes and Spotify. Craig can be followed at Craig Allen FP. I can be followed at SM Quarterman. The fight has been stopped. See you next week. Craig, say something witty.
Let's get into it.
All right, guys. Make sure you watch The West Wing tomorrow night.